We're joined today here by Adem Bunkeddeko. Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Pleasure to be here.
Obviously, we have a race for comptroller right now going on. We have several candidates on the Democratic side. In the primary, we do know that Tom DiNapoli is the chosen party nominee, but obviously people like you have an opportunity to petition to get on the ballot as we head closer to June. And there is opponent on the Republican side. We spoke to him recently. You can find that anyway. Let's get to you. First of all, here we are, and let's just begin with why you're here. And obviously, you have run for office, Congress before.
Yeah.
Now, years later, you look to get back into this circle. Why?
I think for me, it's the series of core economic issues impacting the state. I mean, if you ask me why I'm here, I'm really here because of two people, my parents. They came here as war refugees from Uganda. Again, my dad, $50 in his pocket, clothes he was wearing, extra set in a suitcase, and went to a detention center, was able to get asylum, was able to save up enough money to bring my mom, working McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, janitor, security guard. I'm born at Elmhurst Hospital in Queens. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment. And that one-bedroom apartment provided the platform that changed the trajectory of my life. And I am deeply concerned that in this state, whether you live in New York City, whether you live in the capital region, whether you live in central New York, whether you live in western New York, in Mohawk Valley or the southern tier, housing has become an incredible failure that is now threatening the economic conditions for the state. And I believe the Office of the State Comptroller not only should be addressing the core issue around housing, while managing to also be able to give back to retirees in returns, we can solve these problems. Housing is just one issue, wages, prices, but more broadly, opportunity. And for me, the Office of the State Comptroller, as the fiscal guardian of this state, there is a moral imperative, but an economic imperative to address these core considerations. Otherwise, we are not going to have an economy in this state. And so you ask me why I'm here. We need to turn this around. We need to reimagine this office in a completely different way. And so I'm happy to talk about how we're going to do that.
It's an interesting approach to take it to this office.
Right.
Like I mentioned, you've run for Congress before.
Yeah.
Was it 9, right?
Yeah.
It was 9 in 2018, 2020. And why take it? You mentioned the economic arm of the comptroller's office, but why not run for Congress again? Why not run for a city council seat, right? Or a state seat?
Right.
Why is it this lane instead of the other lane?
No, I think it's a great question. And you mentioned why you've run for Congress. Housing has always been the central core for what I've always believed in. And look, let's be honest, in New York State, we are completely off the tracks when it comes to housing. And going to Washington right now, while it would be an incredible honor and humbling and the whole bit, we are not going to solve the housing problem coming out of Washington. We're not going to solve it even coming out of City Council. The Office of the State Comptroller is the fiscal steward of this state and is responsible for managing one of the largest pension funds in the United States, but also has fiscal oversight over one of the largest state budgets in the United States, $254 billion state budget. And so the question becomes how are we going to manage the resources that we have today, either through the pension fund while honoring our obligations to retirees, but also investing in the next generation of New Yorkers. And to be quite honest, there's no other person in this country who controls more money than the Office of the State Comptroller. Not the President of the United States, not the Governor of New York, not the Mayor of New York City. And so if we're serious about solving housing, we have to use every tool in the state's toolkit. And I believe this office has often been underutilized and on the sidelines. And so, again, if we're serious about housing, if we're serious about rewriting a completely broken contract in this state, we need to use this office to its full potential. And that's what I believe we can do. And that's not coming out of any other place, Washington, City Hall, or even Albany.
So what mechanism do you do to address that? You mentioned the pension fund, you mentioned the budget. How would you, if elected, leverage those? Or and how do you make that work built on a system that doesn't seem like that's working, doing that right now?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about it. Look, you've got a supply issue, right? We don't have enough housing. And if you look across the border here in Canada and Quebec or Ontario, The two leading pension funds, Ontario Teachers and CDPQ in Quebec, are not only generating higher returns than the New York State Common Retirement Fund, they're also investing in the regional economy. They are strengthening energy infrastructure. They're investing in transportation infrastructure. They're investing in housing, and they're getting better returns. So for me, there is not only an opportunity for us to, again, honor our obligations to retirees, but to fundamentally transform the housing market in a way that we can't by being a financing partner to a variety of institutions, whether it's churches, mosques, libraries. There is a physical footprint that already exists, and we have models. There are successful churches that are building housing. There are successful places where we've seen libraries use their space. And the question is can the pension fund be catalytic in driving that? And I believe we can. And by the way, make a lot of money for retirees. Then there's the demand side, right? We've got a number of New Yorkers who continue to go to work, play by the rules, do everything they're supposed to do, and yet their wages don't keep up with prices, right? Kathy Hochul, the governor, and the legislature just passed the Housing Access Voucher Program last year for $50 million. Part of what I'm trying to think about is, look, one of the proposals is we've got $20 billion in unclaimed funds. Why don't we take the incoming flows and create an opportunity trust fund in which we not only give our children seed capital that they can use at age 18, but we can expand and give more money to the Housing Access Voucher Program to keep people in their houses today. And so we have to pull at every level, at every lever in order to address this problem. And for me, again, the Office of the State Comptroller is one of the most important in helping to solve these issues, and we must use it.
The comptroller would say, I believe, in that aspect of trying to put their office into the housing realm. Right now, I believe 14% of the fund, I have it here, is in real estate.
Yes.
Would say that it's not the job of the comptroller's office to rectify policy issues.
The job of the comptroller is to manage the pension fund and to make money. And so you mean to tell me you can't make money investing in affordable housing? Like, I completely reject that premise.
Would a developer say that?
You tell me. Bring on some of these developers and ask them if the pension fund was a financing partner, do you think we can not only make money but also build more units? And I bet you the answer is yes. I totally reject this premise that it is not the job of the comptroller to be able to think about policy or any of this. You are the fiscal guardian of New York State. Your job is to think about these things. It is to think about whether or not, if we have a housing failure, how is this going to impact the state's economic viability? If we have failure in transit, how is this going to impact the state's economy? These are important issues that, again, yes, we have a deep obligation to honor our obligations to retirees. But I totally reject this notion that by investing in affordable housing in a profound way, that somehow we are breaching fiduciary duty. You know what's actually breaching fiduciary duty? Paying out retirees and then having those same retirees come and say, well, I can't even afford to live in the state that I've worked all my life in. I can't afford to pay for the Con Ed bill, or I can't even afford to ensure that my children are going to have a better life. That, to me, is the job of the Office of the State Comptroller. It is to protect the economic well-being of this state. And we must use every tool at our disposal while ensuring that we are honoring our obligations. And again, we see it happening in Canada, we see it happening everywhere else. So we can do this.
Why isn't the auditing arm of the comptroller's office doing enough in this? From your standpoint, there's been audits every year, or a couple times a year. Sure. There was one on Mitchell-Lama housing and the conditions there a few weeks ago. Why isn't that enough to address this issue in your eyes?
A piece of paper that tells me that Mitchell-Lama is not working, yeah, I think all of us can agree that that's probably true, right? Mm-hmm. But then the question is, well, how are you going to then drive the sort of impact? Again, you're one of the world's largest institutional investors. And so if we're thinking seriously about housing, how do we, again, provide different models to be catalytic in addressing the challenges that your audits are coming apart with. You know, take for instance the MTA. We all agree, if you ride the subway in New York City or Metro North or Long Island Railroad, service is probably not keeping up with what you're paying, right? I believe we should have a deep dive on the forensic audit. By the way, the pension fund also buys MTA debt. And so how are we going to then say we are going to be making changes across the system? Again, auditing is not just for the purposes of just saying, hey, look at this report. We also have to find a way to drive the policy conversation in a significant way. And I believe, again, the Office of the State Comptroller, per the state constitution, has been vested this kind of authority to do so. And so the question is whether we're going to use it or not.
Can you then, how do you compel someone to do that? Because I think that's been one of the big questions, not just raised by you, but by others, by himself, Tom DiNapoli, of the authority of this office of issuing recommendations, and then what happens after that has been one of the big questions, I think, in this campaign. And it seems like right now the incumbent says, well, that's all we can do by state law. You seem to believe it differently by the state constitution.
Again, these two things they move in unison with one another, right? So if you are seeing a structural failure happening in one element, how does that now impact the investing capacity of the state, right? So if you say, hey, you know, we see a failure in housing, that's actually probably a market opportunity for the pension fund to play a more proactive role, right? And so to me, these two things are connected. Like, it's to say that merely by the fact of the auditing function, well, we've recognized the problem. Well, okay, well, how is that driving across the entire office, right? If we say there's an opportunity now in housing failure, well, are we investing more into affordable housing, which we all know is a significant issue? I mean, the city has done this, the NYSers. I mean, so to me, policy is not just about recognizing the problem, but then saying, okay, across my toolkit, what else can I do to drive that? And so I completely reject this idea that, okay, an audit is supposed to now not shape anything, and that's all I'm supposed to do. Well, there's also other functions within this auditing, right? You can refuse payments. You can start to challenge whether or not the law is actually being followed, right? I mean, take, for instance, Bruce Blakeman in Nassau County. Are you telling me you're using state funds in collaboration with ICE? Is this the way in which is this not a violation of state law? And if it is, then refuse the payment. Yeah, auditing is one element, but the Constitution gives you a lot of tools to drive change. And so, again, the question is, are we going to use those tools?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about investing and divesting in a second here. Sure. But first, before we get deeper into the pension fund conversation, your campaign launch, I believe it was the first video, was what is the comptroller, right? But how did you define that? What is the pension fund? Because I think that's another thing many people don't understand. But what is your definition of that?
So the pension fund is very simple. There's a number of employees across who work in our state government who, through their years of service, are due a retirement package, which we pull that money together and invest in order to ensure that they're going to have the kinds of benefits that they have accrued over time in service to our state. And this pension fund is now one of the largest institutional investors in the world. And my view is, how do we think about modernizing this investment strategy in a way that fundamentally aligns with how we as New Yorkers should think about the broader economy? Again, all these things are linked. They're not separate silos. So auditing impacts how we think about investing. Investing thinks about how we should think about auditing and the like. And my view is, again, if you look at the Canadian model, if you look at Ontario Teachers, CPP, even in Australia, Australian Super, or CDPQ, there's an enormous amount of opportunities that they are seeing in which, okay, here is an opportunity that we have a challenge on transit, for instance. So in Montreal, it's the pension fund that has built the Montreal REM rail system, operates it, owns it. That is taking a problem and seeing, okay, in one element in public policy that, okay, we can do something different here, but then the pension fund saying, okay, not only can we not do something here, we can also honor our obligations to retirees. So this stuff needs to all move holistically not in silos. And again, if we're thinking about it in silos, then yeah, nothing is going to change. And so what is going to be the reimagining of the state's economic architecture to address these failures in housing, in transit, in wages, in prices, but more importantly, in opportunity? Look, I'm very blessed. I grew up in a one-bedroom apartment. My parents were war refugees. My dad came here, he didn't even have status. He had to go get asylum. And yet they were able to generate an outcome through their children that they could have never imagined anywhere else. And I would argue nowhere else except in this state, New York. And my concern is if we don't tackle housing, if we don't tackle transit, if we don't tackle wages, if we don't tackle prices, then the economy is going to completely fall apart. And you're going to have more than a bigger problem than just auditing or trying to find a return for the pension fund. And that responsibility lies with the Office of the State Comptroller. They are the economic guardian of the state.
The New York State Opportunity Fund.
Yeah.
You mentioned that briefly a moment ago.
Trust fund, yeah, opportunity
The trust fund.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about that. Where's the money coming from?
Right.
Who's getting it?
Right. So, look, one of my proposals is to create a trust fund for our state. And we have a very unique asset that sits in our books, is unclaimed funds. And my view is that there's a number of folks who have accrued a lot of money, and for a variety of reasons, that money will sit with the state. And that number has gone from 3 billion to 20 billion today, and is going to grow exponentially over time. And right now, it's just sitting in the state's general reserve. It's used to plug budget gaps and the like. But I think there's a more fundamental opportunity to use this money, in which if we expect this incoming flows to sort of continue to accrue to tens of billions, instead of just plugging budget gaps, why don't we take the money and create an investment trust at which, even at a conservative return at 5%, would generate at $20 billion, $1 billion. And if we gave every child in this state $1,000, there's roughly 200,000 children who are born in this state every year. And we put money aside, gave them $1,000, and at age 18, they could go buy a house, they could take care of a sick parent like I've had to, they can go to school or college or start a business. So we are investing in the people who are going to ensure that the economic future of the state continues to grow stronger. That is one element of the trust fund. But if we are creating a trust fund of this kind, presumably we can start to even set aside money to do, again, like the Housing Access Voucher Program, or investing in maternal health or childcare. But more importantly, buffering our state and its financial and finances from shocks from Washington. So instead of being held at gunpoint by Donald Trump, do X, Y, and Z, if we actually had money that we said, okay, if we don't know what's happening in Washington, it's too unpredictable, or even if the state's finances move up and down, right? We're very tied heavily to Wall Street and its revenues. Yeah. If we had another cushion aside from the reserve that's for bonding purposes, what could we do and what would we invest in? Again, my point is I'm very concerned that a lot of how we've thought about the economics of the state is not addressing the core concerns of everyday New Yorkers. Look, there are people who go to work and can't afford to live in their house. Literally. That is not a tenable situation for our state going forward. And so what are we going to do about it? And my view is we have to use every tool available. And yes, the Office of the State Comptroller is included in that.
You talked the trust fund, a follow-up quickly on Is that with the unclaimed funds being a big part of that?
Right.
Is that a reliable enough pool of money, knowing potentially some of that money isn't there, or someone that is going to claim their money could take it all at once if there is an economic headwind or something?
We can structure this in a way in which we not only allow for the principle for any heir to rightfully claim unclaimed funds and manage the outflows. That is well within reason. I don't believe we can't do that. And that's partly what I want to ensure, that everyone who has unclaimed funds can always access it. But we also have to be realistic, and I think the current comptroller is correct on this assessment. Most of the people who have unclaimed funds are no longer here, and that money will probably not be claimed. And the question becomes should it just sit idle in the state's general reserve, or can it be actively invested where the investment income could go to the greater good of the state? And I believe that's the case. Now, I'm happy to work with the governor or the legislature to ensure that we do that through whatever legislative change needs. But to me, these are the kinds of ideas that we need to be thinking about. Again, we are at a true inflection point in the state, in which if we do not turn this around economically, we are not going to have an economy at all.
Does the individual contribute to that?
Which one?
This fund? This trust fund?
You mean the trust fund for the children?
Yeah.
No, it will be, it's deeded to you, it's given to you. We can allow for folks to add to it as they sort of grow along over the course of time, but we want to be able to give you the foundational seed account.
So that's different than the new Trump accounts announcement.
That's very different.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure, because I know that there were some questions about that and who that could help and who that could hurt. Or help more at the end of the day.
This is a totally separate idea.
Right. A separate idea as well. If you go to your website, the first nugget on there is about Madison Square Garden. I got to ask about it.
Oh, it's a fun one.
Yeah, it is. It is. Why? Why to have a stake in MSG?
Because, again, as you noted, the job of the state comptroller is to manage the pension fund, and our job is to make money. And we see an asset that I think is undervalued in the public market context. And I believe that New Yorkers should own assets or participate in the upside of assets that they generate so much value for. Think about who goes to Knicks and Rangers games. It is your school teacher, it is your fireman, it is your police officer, it is a variety of folks who save up their hard-earned money to go buy tickets at MSG, to go buy burgers and hot dogs at the concession stand, who pay to stream their teams on their TV.
Yeah.
There's a lot of value that's generated in that, and I believe New Yorkers should have a stake in that. Not only because I think it's good economics, but I also think it helps strengthen the social and moral fabric of the state. Again, as the state's economic steward, you are here to think about how not only you strengthen the economy of the state, but how does those parts interrelate politically, economically, socially, and morally? That's what I mean. We have to reimagine this office. It is not simply, someone who's just counting the beans and making sure, okay, the audit is done. It is really part watchdog, part investor, but part architect of how public capital shapes the state economy and beyond. And I believe we need to create an economy that is stronger, fairer, and more dynamic than what we have today.
Would that be where you stop investing in team sports, like MSG? Would you expand to Barclays Center?
No, I mean,
so something for
yeah, I
Brooklyn?
think it's all about being opportunistic, right?
Yeah.
I think, look, the model or the precedent that I think about is the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan. So they started off with a very small stake in the Toronto Raptors, Raptors, Maple Leafs, and Scotiabank Arena. Mm-hmm. And they were a minority position. Over time, they grew into a control position. But that's seen as one of the most successful financial investments of all time. Mm-hmm. And so my view is, look, we obviously have a clear fiduciary duty to obviously generate a return for the pension fund. But we can do multiple things too. Fiduciary duty is not simply, oh, I make money at all costs. Again, the Office of the State Comptroller, your authority is obviously vested in the state constitution, but it is given to you by the people of this state. And voters every 4 years should render whether or not that fiduciary duty is in alignment with the values of the people of the state of New York.
So that gets me my next question when it comes to divesting.
Right.
That's supposed to come up quite a bit, even beyond the scope of this race.
Right.
Is there anywhere that you would divest?
Yeah, I think, look, to me, my focus wants to be New York. So climate, foreign sovereign bonds, I don't think that should be the priority of this state. I believe we need to be focusing on New York. There is an opportunity cost when you are thinking about other sort of dimensions, countries, all of that. And my view is if we are focusing on that and not focusing on New York, then this is the situation that we have, which is, okay, you know, you're generating a pension fund return. But again, the cruel irony about that is most of the retirees now in this state who get a pension can't afford to live here, can't afford to pay the Con Ed bill, can't afford to make sure that their children are going to have a decent opportunity and life better than the one that they have. And so my view is we need to be investing in New York, the Knicks, the Rangers, affordable housing. These are the places, our energy, transportation infrastructure. That is the focus. And when you start to divert that focus away to other places, other countries, then again, we start to get into the situation we have now found ourselves in.
You mentioned climate.
Yeah.
In what way?
For me, I think we need to be in a place where fossil fuels need to get out of, we need to get out of that business. It's no longer productive in our, and again, my view is if you take a look at our energy grid, I mean, you look at the Canadians, they're paying 20 cents a kilowatt than what we're doing. We're about to pay almost close to $1 in New York, and it's only going up. And so the question is am I going to be a shareholder to Exxon, or would I rather own the distribution and transmission networks that are going to help bring down energy costs? Again, when you have a pool of capital, you've got to make a choice. And that opportunity cost, I think we have often borne out, largely because we have failed to imagine how do we not only generate better returns, but invest in New York. I want us to invest in New York.
So all foreign bonds?
Yeah.
All foreign bonds. Okay.
Yeah.
And obviously it's come up a few times already, Palantir, and I think that's been characterized in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
Would that be something, and knowing right now in these political, but could that open the can of worms to other investments?
Should we make money?
Because Palantir, they don't just invest or work with ICE on data. They do a lot of things.
Absolutely.
As do other companies.
Absolutely. But I think the question I have is, would you prefer the state to be making money investing in private prison companies? I don't. Yeah, there are plenty of ways to make money. I think we can understand that. The question, again, I come back to is, where should our focus and attention be? And I think our focus and attention has been in places and areas that don't really focus on improving the lives of New Yorkers. And my view is, had we invested in affordable housing 20 years ago, we probably would not have the problem that we have today. Seriously, we would not have the problem that we have today. And so the question becomes all this stuff is things that we should not be focusing on. Fossil fuels, foreign bonds, all of this stuff. We need to focus on New York. I'm telling you, if we do not get this right, we are going to have an economy that literally is falling apart. And guess what? Most New Yorkers would agree with me. Whether you live in Schenectady, whether you live in Albany, whether you live in Troy, Buffalo, in Canarsie, Flatbush, Queens, this isn't working. And we need to reimagine the model completely.
Would you consider that because that's been morally, right? That's a way you say you would operate this, right? Politically,
right?
Would you go that far or no?
Go what far?
In terms of operating the pension fund because of a political issue?
No. Look, the primary and paramount consideration is fiduciary duty, right? Do I believe said investment is going to be in the economic benefit of the people of the state of New York?
What if Palantir is that?
But so here's the deal. It's not the only thing, right? You have to make choices. And so the question is, you mean to tell me Palantir is the only way I can generate a return? No. And so, yes, our primary and most paramount consideration is whether or not an investment makes money. That's not the only consideration. Again, I don't want to make money investing in private prisons. Do you think we should do that? I don't think the voters of this state believe that. I don't believe the people of this state believe that. Yeah, I think that's a false choice. This idea that the only way I can make money in tech or tech stocks is investing in Palantir? Come on. What are we talking about here? That's ridiculous. No serious financial professional would say that. And again, I believe this role, because you are not just simply an appointee or some, private market investment professional. Your obligation, your mandate comes from the people of this state, and they weigh in on that. They do consider values. They do consider whether or not you're going to generate a return. And that's my point. I think we can do not only investing in the future of this state, but I think we can make money in ways that, again, don't detract from our values. Like, I just don't believe that to be the case.
Okay. Before we go and finish up, we touched on it briefly, but I do want to come back to auditing because that's a big part of what this office does.
Of course it is. Yeah.
So I didn't want to gloss over that because I want to make sure people know how you were, where you would go and where do you start. If you can name a place where you think would require an audit, a report, oversight, if you were elected.
CDPAP contract. I think we need to get a real handle on what's going on over there.
So the comptroller did say they were written out of that. The office was in the legislation when that was put together. The office was not allowed by the legislation to be a part of overseeing that contract.
I would challenge the constitutionality of that.
Okay.
Again, I think just because you're written out of something doesn't mean that that's the only response. Again, I think part of what we need to really think about very differently about this office is, what is the appropriate role? Now look, that contract was no bid. It was consolidating into one provider. It has had a number of issues, as the New York Times has reported. And yes, I know the current comptroller has said, well, they cut me out of it. And I guess the question is do you think that's even legal? And I'm not sure that it is. And so, to me, there are a number of places like this. The MTA is another one. There's a lot going on. You mean to tell me at a $21 billion operating budget, I ride the 4-5 every single day. And that's from coming into Brooklyn into Manhattan. There's a lot going on in our public systems that don't make sense to most people. I think if you ride the Metro North, Long Island Railroad, the New York City subway, the buses, and you're like, these guys just raised the prices on you. I don't even know what I'm paying for. There are a number of areas where I think we need to really think critically and deeply. And by the way, once we think critically and deeply in an audit capacity, does this now present us with investing opportunities where we can not only take advantage of what is clearly broken, but not only improve it and do right by pensioners? Again, these things are not silos. They need to be thought about holistically, but the office itself needs to be completely reimagined.
So after Friday, after the convention, of course, we saw Tom DiNapoli get the nomination, and there wasn't enough weight of the vote for you and actually the others in there.
Sure.
So that means the work continues.
Of course.
And now, does it? You have to go petition to get on the ballot.
Absolutely.
How do you go about doing that?
You go and get the petitions. That's how it happens.
You have worked, in your background, that was a big part of
I'm an organizer.
Your background, that's what you did.
Yeah.
I don't know if everyone understands what it takes to do that.
Yeah, look, I've run for Congress, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
You got a petition.
Yeah.
I suspect if you get a clipboard, you get a pen, you get the petition, and then you go out there.
Money and people.
But it's really people. People power this. And to me, petitioning is a good exercise in letting voters know, here's the choice at hand. Because I think ultimately, on June 23rd, we're going to have a choice. We're going to have a choice about whether or not You believe this office that a lot of people may not hear about or know, but has enormous financial authority and can fundamentally solve the most pressing, broken issues from housing, wages, prices, opportunity, transit. Whether you believe that office should continue to sit on the sidelines or should actually try to solve these problems. And I believe New Yorkers want someone who is not only going to try, but try to put together a completely new contract in this state, using public finance for the public good. And I believe that on June 23rd, voters will choose something different.
Adem Bunkeddeko, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. You can always find us on our Power in Politics podcast page. Just search Power in Politics CBS 6 wherever you get your podcasts. It is free. Subscribe and like and give us a rating today so that way we can continue to grow and talk to more of the people that you want to hear from here on Power in Politics.